Do you remember those missing posters you used to find on the back of milk cartons? Well, hypothetically, imagine the missing person is some random adult and you're traveling through the forest to find them, except instead of doing it to rescue them, you're doing it to hunt them. And hypothetically, imagine these woods are filled with cryptid-like monsters. And keeping in mind that this is all hypothetical, imagine the reason you're hunting them is because you're part of an evil secret society that worships this giant eldritch horror pit in the ground named Elijah, and so you need to hunt down these people and feed them to the pit or be fed to it yourself. Now, what if none of that was hypothetical? That would mean that you're playing our upcoming single-player detective horror game, For the Pit. The title will probably be changed later. My name is Isaac, and I'm in charge of the game's sound, creatures, and story. I previously worked as the director of Poppy Playtime.
My name is Gunnar, and I'm the one and only programmer.
Hi, my name is Preston, and I'm the artist among many other things for the team.
The three of us met all the way back in elementary school and, about a year and a half ago, decided we wanted to start making games together and formed Curious Fox Socks. So let me tell you about this game. It's sort of like a cross between Solo Lethal Company for the horror side and Papers, Please for the detective side. You're part of this evil society that worships Elijah, a giant pit. But Elijah is hungry, so you must enter the woods and find a missing person to feed to him. There's littered items all throughout the forest, and some of these come from your target, aka the person you're tracking down. Using the clues presented to you, as well as the info you have about your target, you'll then need to deduce what belongs to them and follow the trail. Once you find the target, you hit them over the head with a stick and carry them back to your truck. However, this forest is haunted, and the later it is in the day, the more monsters you'll find, such as a massive spider whose legs blend in with the surrounding trees, or an endlessly long worm that always knows your location. If you can escape the woods successfully, you'll return to home base and feed the pit at last. With the concept in mind, it was time to choose a style. We decided we wanted to go for a vibe reminiscent of old PS1 games, like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Or for some newer examples in this style, there's No One Lives Under the Lighthouse and Mysteries Under Lake Ophelia. So great, we've got a solid concept. Now we just need to make it. That should be easy, right? Okay, so it's a bit hard, really hard actually, and one thing that was really gnawing at me was the detective part of the game. I wanted a formula that could be played endlessly, again, like Papers, Please. We needed a system that could generate a random person to go after, as well as generate unique items to go with them, and it needed to be made in a way where the player can get better at it over time, but never to the point where they can solve a case instantly. The player needs to continue to feel smart every time they solve a case. All of that is a lot of work to program, and worst of all, we don't even know if it'll be fun. So I needed to come up with a way for us to test if it could be fun without us actually programming it. This is a paper prototype. Here's how I made it. So first, I made these case files. This one is for Bo Benny. He's a lumberjack. In-game, you'll get this info on your flip phone. Now, a bunch of items are going to spawn in the forest, and it's our job as the player to decipher which ones belong to Bo. So, put on your trench coat and grab a cigarette. I don't smoke, so I just got this sticky note. Beat it, toots. These streets ain't what they used to be. I don't want to start a fire. So, let's say we find a baseball hat and an axe. He is a lumberjack, but it's technically possible he dropped a hat too. We need more info, and this is why we added clues. Inside of these items are sticky notes, which can give additional info. In-game, you'll see these as glowy dots on the item. First one for the hat, a logo. But this means nothing on its own, so we allowed players to take pictures of clues for extra info. According to my contact, that logo is for the head warehouse, which has a mostly male customer base. And the hat is camo. Okay. For the axe, however, we have a Bearman logo. And the axe is two-handed, which, according to my contact, means it's probably for wood cutting. It seems like the axe is Bo's, but the hat would also make sense, and this was a problem. We do want players to take an educated guess, but sometimes there's just not enough info to do that. This is where the wildcard clue came in. Items that do not belong to Bo will get their wildcard clue at random. But if the item does belong to Bo, then the wildcard clue is generated to work with him. Let me show you. For the hat, it says that some white hair was left behind. And looking at Bo's case file, he's blonde. But for the axe wildcard, the item has a B on it. B for Bo, B for Benny, probably. And now we can say with almost complete certainty that this is indeed Bo's axe. Case solved. From here, I got straight to work letting people test, and seemingly, results were good. As people sorted through the items and clues, you could really see them thinking hard to figure out the answers. Of course, things might go a bit differently once it's actually in game, but we'll get to that in the next devlog. For now, we had the detective mechanics in a pretty solid place, so it was time to start creating the actual game, more specifically, the world you play in. For this, I'll pass it off to Gunnar so that he can teach you.
One major aspect that we want in our game is random generation. First, let's look at terrain, as who would want a completely flat forest? However, I'll explain something first. In game development, if you want randomness, you'll most likely use a noise texture. Using the noise texture, you can retrieve a float between 0 and 1 using X and Y coordinates on the noise texture. Amplify the value by a number, let's say 10, and you got yourself the Y coordinates of terrain. But how do I apply these numbers to a mesh? Luckily, Godot has something called an array mesh, which gives me full control of how the mesh is shaped. So after making a grid of these new meshes, terrain is done. But what about the objects? Currently, the game generates 100 by 100 chunks of the area. In each 100 by 100 chunk, there are 30 by 30 possible positions where an object can spawn. It runs through each position, has a chance to spawn an object, and if the object is assigned to that spawn, it runs another process that'll determine what object should go there based on a spawn chance that each object is assigned. The problem with this approach is that it's not very flexible. For the longest time, random generation has confused me. How does one go from a few noise textures to full-fledged terrain with hundreds of different structures and objects like Minecraft? Our answer actually lies within Terraria. Long story short, they use noise textures to paint on an image in code and assign each pixel to a color, with what I assume each color having a different outcome. I tried it out and was surprised with how good this system works. Now that random generation is done for the terrain and objects, the last thing we need to randomly generate is the target's path. Using a simple formula, we generate a path that has 3 points. At each point, there will be a small area full of items, with one of the items in that area belonging to the target. Find all the clues, and you will be pointed to the target. The game has an inventory system, and it too has gone through changes. Before, it was just these simple rectangles, and using Q and E on the keyboard, you could scroll through the items. Now, it is much more immersive, with the player holding R to place the backpack down and look at its contents. Lastly, we wanted the game to have that pixelated old PS1 and 64 look. Obviously, using low poly models and low res textures help, but it wasn't enough. The main thing that helped was turning the extra resolution from 1280 by 720 to 640 by 360. It gives a nice pixelated look that doesn't take away from the visuals. We also have a shader on the tree trunks that give them that PS1 jitter, but it's not currently very noticeable. The next things I'll be working on is touching up generation, the hideout, item tables, and a day-night cycle. Touching up the generation means exactly that. I still have to add a gift shop, and I would like to add more objects and structures around the map, and fully convert to the new method. The hideout needs textures, some layout adjustments, and NPC function. Items are added to the game, but their specifics are yet to be added, which is very important since these allow the player to actually do detective work and not just guess which one belongs to the player. And finally, a day-night cycle. I tried adding a cycle using a physical sky and animating its rotation, but this produced some strange results. For one, the sky just didn't look the best, and two, the sun would illuminate objects while it was below the map. So my solution is by animating the color, which produces better results in terms of lighting, but it's still not fully done.
Now, I've been having to learn a few new mediums to get that retro style feel that we're going for, and here's how I accomplished it. The first new medium I've had to learn more about is high resolution pixel art. I've done pixel art for about 7 years and professionally for only about 1.5. I've mostly stuck to lower resolution pixel art, trying to keep around 16 by 16 pixels, and this is partially due to just my fondness of the art style and the limitations, and also self-hatred. But one of the biggest reasons is because it's just what I'm most comfortable with. Now, for this project, it was definitely clear I had to step out of my comfort zone, and a big step away from that is also by getting away from that cartoony art style. Now, a good way I did this is by getting rid of those hard black outlines. Now, how do I fix this, you ask? Or maybe you didn't ask, I don't know. Well, I did colored outlines instead. So what you do is you take your black outline and replace it with a dark shade of the color that's already on the sprite. Now, by doing this, it gives the texture a more realistic look, but still keeping away from that cartoony style and distinguishing the object from the background. As for the high resolution itself, I've had to practice filling in the spaces a little better with more shading. I use methods like dithering and transitioning colors to fill the space and make it feel less empty, and add a little bit more realism. Another great tool that I've been using to get this more realistic style, and just for pixel art in general, is by using a color blender. You choose color 1, and then color 2, and then you select how many midpoints you want, and then bam, it shows every one of those midpoints in between there, and you get a better transition of shade. One thing you don't want to do with pixel art is just make the color darker. Don't do that. just don't. The other medium I've had to learn is 3D modeling, which, before starting work on the game, I had little to no knowledge of how to do. Look at this early 3D model. It's disgusting. This was my first attempt, to be fair, but it's disgusting. I used the program Crocotile, which is specifically made for a low poly retro art style feel. That's a mouthful. And I really enjoy it so far, and I recommend it. But I will be learning Blender soon. Now, for the models we already have in the game so far, the tree was the first step. I started by making a 2D pixel art version of the tree. This ended up helping me a lot, but honestly, it was originally because I was just hoping I didn't have to model yet. But what I did is I cut up the branches, and then I cut up the tip, and applied everything to the 3D model. And bam, you got a tree. We also have a taller variant of the tree, and how we did that is just by doubling the trunk size. Easy. Now for the branches, I used a 2D plane to apply these textures. A lot of older games did this kind of thing to save on memory and storage and all of that good old garbage. I used it out of laziness, and also to achieve the look we were going for, but mostly laziness. Although I'm still learning, I'm proud of what I made so far. Here's some other things that are in the game, backpack being my favorite, and I have many more to do, and I'm looking forward to that journey. If you have any comments or recommendations or tips or something, well, leave them in the comments, and I can read them and take note of them. I'll talk to you guys later, and I look forward to your feedback. Enjoy the rest of the video. Goodbye!
Here's a few tips from me to you. Number 1, the best way to get started is just starting. As simple as it sounds, this can be the hardest step for some. Go into it being okay with the idea of making a bad game, because you will make some bad games. Start by copying a tutorial, and from there try to make something simple like a platformer. Death's Toll is the first official game I've worked on, and trust me, it is by far the biggest. But I made a few small games throughout my life on different engines, like GameMaker and Scratch. Number 2, if you don't know how to add a feature, add it in any way you can. It doesn't matter how bad it is, you can fix it later. When I first did an inventory, it was done extremely poorly, but since I did it, I had a better grasp of it, and from there I was able to rewrite it to work better. Number 3, write out your current plan/goals. Set aside like 20 minutes a day at least to just write and plan for your game. And let's say you want an inventory, but have no idea. Break it down into 10 tiny steps that you can do. Also, if you already consume too much content on any social media, incorporate videos about game development. Consuming game development content will make you more likely to work on games. And the final one I want to say is get rid of your bad habits. It doesn't have to be all of them, but you should try to reduce them at least, or just straight up avoid them.
At this point, there was one major part of our game that was still a bit lacking. The game is meant to be a blending of tones. We want humor throughout, especially when you're talking to other members of the society, but we also want horror! Between the three of us, we ended up deciding that it would be me who was in charge of modeling the creatures of this game. One small issue, I don't know how to model creatures. So, for the first time in years, I installed Blender and got to work. This video from the Sickly Wizard was a godsend, so please go check him out. I have literally had the video left open on my computer for the past month because of how helpful it's been. Anyways, we wanted the first monster that we added to the game to be easy, so here's what we settled on. From a mysterious hole in the forest, a freakish worm with an endlessly long body will emerge and slowly but surely track towards the player through the forest. I cannot draw, so I decided to use the next best thing, references! And this creature known as the Mongolian deathworm seemed to fit the bill perfectly. In Blender, I started with a simple circle and then extended it out on both sides before shrinking the sides to create that segmented look. Then I added another circle, this time with only 3 sides, and shaped it into a long sharp tooth. From here I wanted to just copy and paste the teeth around the whole mouth, but it became obvious very fast that that wasn't gonna work. So instead, I made the teeth a little more random and jagged and then copied them everywhere. I took the inside of the mouth and made it dark, changed the shape of the headpiece to give it a more distinct look, and finally added a bunch of rows of teeth. Then with some texturing and final touches, it was looking pretty good. Comment any name ideas for this guy. Now with the model more or less done, we need to actually put it in the game, but sadly that'll have to wait until the next devlog. In the meantime, I was also able to create the rough human model that we'll use for the targets, the other pit chanters you'll find around the base, who are intentionally both a bit silly and a bit scary, and the pit itself. Elijah. The target and pit still need texturing, however. I also put in some work on another one of the game's monsters, the tree spider, but that'll have to wait till next time too. The upcoming weeks of development will be focused primarily on getting AI for some of the game's creatures and finally implementing a couple monsters into the forest, along with cleaning up the game a bit so that it's playtester ready. We've got some pretty intense development ahead of us as we fill up the game with all the missing beats, such as a gift shop where you can buy and upgrade special tools, a finished hideout with creepy NPCs, 8 to 10 unique monsters roaming throughout the forest, and much more. For some of us, this game has actually become our full-time job, so we have opened a Patreon where you can consider supporting supporting our work in exchange for some cool rewards. It's starting pretty simple right now, but we'll spice it up as the game gets further along. For example, we'll soon have our first demo of the game ready for playtesting, and higher tier patrons will get access to that. Currently, we've got 3 tiers. The first gets you access to all of our secret updates and teasers, an exclusive channel enroll in our Discord, and an unreleased alpha build of our last game, Death's Toll. With tier 2, you also get those things and your name in the credits of these devlogs, as well as the game's actual credits once it's out. And lastly, tier 3 will also get you all those things, plus a verbal shoutout at the end of each devlog, and a name and quote of your choosing in the game's yearbook. Inside of the hideout, players will be able to check out this yearbook and read what everyone wrote. If you've got ideas for other rewards we could add, leave a comment letting us know. Please consider checking out the Patreon, link is in the description. Anyways, thanks for watching, stay tuned to see what comes next,
and we'll see you.